This is the Hot Take Hockey Podcast with your hosts, Lucas and John Viveiros.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hot Take Hockey Podcast, episode 29. We've got an absolute legendary TSN broadcaster. He's been with TSN for over 25 years. Farhan Lalji, we're so excited to chat with him. You've probably seen him through CFL coverage, a lot of Canucks chat. I know he does some stuff with the Vancast podcast, so you can hear from him on his Vancouver Canucks thoughts through that. Farhan, how are you doing, man? Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
John, Lucas, thanks for having me, guys. It should be fun. I've heard so much about this podcast from Duthie, so I'm actually nervous, if you can imagine.
I can't imagine, Farhan. I've seen you on the broadcast. I've seen you on my TV for quite a while. So you've definitely been one of the big names. Lucas and I were talking about it, and we've got a lot of friends that are big fans of you. So we were really excited to get you on. I think, our conversations here, I think, will go in a few different directions, but just first and foremost, I started about a year ago. You talked about 25 years at TSN. So just overall, your experiences through broadcasting sports, and just overall, I know you have a family now. So just work and family balance. Like, how has it been the last 25 years? Like, overall, how do you look back on it and just going forward as well?
Wow, 25 years, it's thinking back, it just feels like yesterday when I was breaking down the door trying to find a way to get a job at TSN, and I remember getting offered, sitting in the Westin Bayshore Hotel, and my good friend Mike Day, who's no longer with the company, was the vice president at the time, or senior producer for news and information, and he offered me a job, and it was kind of what had happened at the time was from 97 to 99, we had what was called the Western Broadcast Center. So I don't know if you recall, way back then, you probably weren't even born, but we had Sports Desk, now Sports Center, was co-hosted, The Late Show. We had a host in Vancouver and a host in Toronto. So we were expanding, beyond just one bureau like we currently have in Vancouver and every other city. And so we had a few other people, Dave Randorf, David Pratt, and a couple of others. And so I had kind of a job that was half off-air production and half on-air as a reporter and even as a fill-in host. And then I joke all the time with Mike Keenan, or actually I haven't seen him in a while, but back when I used to visit with him, that he's the reason I got a full-time job, because when he was with the Canucks, and we're kind of revisiting that time, I don't know if you've checked out Scott Rintoul's West Coast Express podcast. It's really good. It's like a docu-pod of the Canucks during the West Coast Express era. And, there's an episode about Mike Keenan, and it was like taking me back in time where Keenan every day was like trading somebody, like, new guy coming into practice, new guy playing in a game. Like, it was just so volatile. And Mike was out here for a week, and he said, "This is crazy. We got to make you full-time on air." So that was good. So I always tell Mike that he's the reason I'm a full-time on-air guy instead of juggling back and forth between production and on-air. And from there, it just kind of took off. And my job has really morphed over the years, right? I've had a chance to cover 5 Olympic Games. I've covered so many NBA events back when the Grizzlies were here, and the finals and the drafts and everything. And, I've done Major League Baseball and golf majors. And so I've kind of run the gamut. But, in the last 5, maybe 7 years, things have kind of changed a little bit for me, where it's gone more into the football space. And from a hockey perspective, back when we used to have the national rights, I would do games across the country and be involved in playoff coverage. But once that left, then I was able to kind of really hone in on just the Canucks. And then more football, which is what I want. Like, I love both sports. I love all sports, but I'm a football guy first. I can't deny that. And I've followed the Canucks as a fan when I was young, and then covered them since 1994 when I first got into the media. So just to be able to do that and not have to necessarily pay attention to what's going on in the Eastern Conference, or I know you guys are into the Leafs. I don't give a damn. Sorry to say.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the Toronto versus Vancouver.
I don't want to have to get into all of that, right? So just to be able to lock into the Canucks, and then all things NFL, CFL, NCAA, and football is my wheelhouse. So the job has morphed kind of into what I've wanted, and I really enjoy every minute of it still.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, Farhan, I wanted to ask you, like, rolling the clock back even further to before you started, in this business and in this career, on this path that you're on, like, what was that growing up like in terms of where were your passions, and in sports? Like, were you pulled to football more so, like what you're speaking to now? Was it hockey? Was it a combination? How did you get into sort of sports as well?
Well, I played everything, right? And I actually talked about this the other day at the Sport BC Awards night, that, when you come in as an immigrant kid, and I came here, I was 4 years old. It was 50 years ago, right? So I don't remember being 4, but I know that as a real youngster, my earliest memories of life in Canada involved sport.
Yeah.
And I was not just into going out and playing. Like, I was that dorky kid that would go out and organize leagues with my friends who were at different schools and different places, just so we could have, more meaning associated with the activity. And it wasn't just kicking the ball around. I wanted to keep score. I wanted to win, and I played organized sport as a kid growing up. And, immigrant family, you play soccer because that's what your parents know, right? Yeah. And I'm trying to get them to let me play hockey. And they're like, what is this? This is cold. It's early in the morning. It's expensive, and eventually, by the time I let them convince me to play hockey, I was in the 6th grade, which even then felt like late, to get any good at it. And I think I had a gravitation to football because not many other kids did it where I was. So, I kind of felt like I was naturally good at it at an early age. So I gravitated to it more, and everybody else was in other things, and I wanted to be different. So I kind of got into that a bit more. But like I said, growing up, I had a chance to play everything. And the one thing for me is that I just never wanted to leave sport. And that's, for me, is, I went from playing everything as a kid growing up to eventually playing football in high school, and then deciding to get into coaching. And then I coached football, shortly after. Like, I played junior football in my late teens, early 20s, and then started coaching at the same time, and then kept going with that, and then got involved with different groups in a leadership capacity. And, and then obviously I was a sports information director at 3 years for Simon Fraser University before, getting my first radio job, which went into TV. So sport has been that thread that has gone through my entire life, and I haven't wanted to leave it for whatever reason. So, the passion for it is, it just never ends. And now my son and my daughter are in it. My son is playing, he played everything, right? He played football, hockey, basketball, and track. Like, last year we did all of it. And now he's just kind of locked into football and track. He played at Burnaby Winter Club and did all of these things. So I was a minor hockey dad for 10 years. And, now my daughter is she's been riding horses forever, but now she's getting into basketball and volleyball and wants to join gymnastics and cross country. And I'm like, yes, right? And trying to find every way to kind of facilitate that. So it's been cool. My wife was a competitive swimmer growing up, and wow. in the football program I coached, she played a really active role. So it's just been around me my entire life, and I don't want it to stop.
Wow. No, that's awesome. And I do want to get to the point where I'm asking you about, like, overall, because you're talking about teaching and coaching, and I know specifically with your kids, but more so I've talked to a lot of people in the industry that go, towards the end of my career, like, I could see public speaking or being a professor. Like, I know a lot of people that have been in the industry, like in the sport media program in Toronto, like, that's people that have been in the broadcasting industry that want to teach, that want to be a professor, that want to just public speak in general. So that's huge. I also want to give Farhan a huge shout because he was actually willing to do this podcast from his son's track meet. So Farhan, I appreciate the commitment and just being a little flexible with us. I know we got you here on Saturday, but that's, people got to share Farhan some love because that's some real big plays right there.
Sorry I didn't let you know in advance.
No, it's okay. I told Lucas, I was like, the fact that you're willing to do that, I was like, man, Farhan's a legend. I can't wait to chat with him.
I felt bad. It took so long to connect, and usually, I'm usually I can squeeze in a little bit more time. Evenings tend to be tougher for me because my son trains in Bellevue, which is just outside of Seattle. Yeah. So we drive down there 3-4 days a week, right? And it's in the evening, so it's tough. So usually when I can squeeze these in, it winds up having to be a little bit earlier in the day. So you got to find a way wherever you are to do it. And having a kid run track in the background, that's okay. That's fun. That's good. That's good background instead of, all these things and trinkets and things that we collect, right? So
next time we'll have to do it from there.
I love that. So overall, so I do want to touch on CFL a little bit with you, but so overall, kind of going forward, do you have I know some people I talk to, they don't want to set goals. Some people just kind of go on the fly. Are you a goal oriented person? Like, do you have still for yourself goals that you want to set or things that you want to accomplish going forward in your career?
Yeah, they're not necessarily career driven though, right? I mean, they're life driven, and there are other things that I want to do. I don't want to stop learning, right? I think that there's some coursework and things like that I'd like to take in some other areys, right? I mean, with this industry, the way it evolves and revolves, you kind of got to be ready for the next step, right? Yep. So, I'm doing like more podcast things, but I actually wouldn't mind looking at some other things outside of broadcasting. Not that I want to leave anytime soon, but feels like most people kind of don't retire completely, right? They always have sort of a side hustle and something else going on. And so there are other things that I want to get into that aren't necessarily in the sports space, but things that you talked about, like whether it involves becoming an instructor or whatever, like those are things that would totally interest me, right? I mean, I've spent a lifetime of teaching and coaching and communicating and public speaking and those types of things. I would like to get into a few of those, but those are all connected to my job and career. Yeah. So I kind of feel like, I'm 54. I don't want to stop learning. I don't want to stop evolving. So, and I don't want all of that evolution to be tied to sports, even though I always want to have it in my life. Don't get me wrong, but I think that I need to put my brain in other places from time to time beyond the field of play.
Yeah, that's really good. I feel like, that's the common like trend, I would say. I feel like when a lot of people go through so much experience, like for ourselves, like bring you on the podcast, like I feel like Farhan, I'd want to talk with you for hours and pull so much and pick from your brain, because we're just kind of like, Lucas works for the NHL, like I'm trying to get into certain broadcasting things. So just picking different people's brains on anything that can anything we can pick up. But yeah, I think at some point here we do got to get to maybe some hockey chat and some, because the Canucks, Farhan. I do want to talk about the Canucks here. So Luke Schenn, Lucas, we'll get to it. Lucas has been a big Luke Schenn guy from day one, and
my son's name is Lucas too. Just so you know.
Awesome.
There we go. The full connection right there.
It's huge Luke Schenn, the group.
Huge Luke Schenn guys. But overall with the Canucks, because Farhan, I gotta say, and we've had a couple of guests, but when we think about Vancouver people, when we think about West, we're thinking Farhan Lalji. So we want your thoughts here. For probably Lucas, a good month or two, every episode of the podcast, the first 10, 20 minutes was on the Canucks, I think.
Yeah. I felt like we were, a Toronto-based podcast. We were talking about the Canucks a lot more than the Leafs all throughout the season.
For all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, for not the right reasons this year, for sure.
And I've talked about it. Like, I have quite a few friends that are Canucks fans, and a lot of friends that I have from BC. So for me, it was more so like, not even like, I was more so just like trying to be a Canucks fan. Like I was trying to put myself in the perspective, like just overall the frustration and overall just the misdirection. So for yourself, like through everything, I've heard your thoughts on TV and on the pod. But just for all the listeners, like what has your thoughts been through the whole process? And I feel like we're kind of going through the same thing as last year, like Boudreau coming in and like this short spurt of like positive, but like, I feel like this year's the wrong year to do it with Tocchet. But what are your overall thoughts on everything that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like Groundhog Day, right? When you look at how the coaching changes have gone down the last couple of years, and really this is I don't want to say culmination, because I don't know if we're even close to being finished it, but this is just part of what happens when you decide you want to take shortcuts as an organization, right? And they haven't wanted to rebuild. It's been just throwing good money after bad. And, you go back to 2016 and some of the dollars that got thrown around, in the Louis Eriksson deal, and that year, like I said, 16, when they had those 4 signings where they're giving guys 3 and 4 year term that they're getting nowhere else, but they can find a way to get it in Vancouver. And we got to make the playoffs this year. We got to make the playoffs this year. And there's just no forward thinking. When Jim Benning slipped and said, we just go day to day, it said so much. And I think we all felt the media in this market, the fans in this market saying, okay, well, now Jim Rutherford's here. And you got a guy with a Stanley Cup resume, and he's done this for 3 different teams. And kind of knows what needs to be done and has the respect around the league and the chops to execute what Jim Benning couldn't. And now here we are again with a short-term rebuild and a retool, and the messaging is so simple or so similar, right? I mean, I remember Jim Benning saying that, we've got a real lack of players in the organization that are in their early 20s, because when the 2011 era team and Mike Gillis was chasing a Stanley Cup, they gave away all these high draft picks, and they drafted so low, and so now we don't have a prospect pool. So we don't want to build the prospect pool. We want to kind of get guys that maybe have been through that and can help us a little sooner in their early 20s. And what are they doing now? Right? Here we are again. So I think that's frustrating for the fan base. And now you've seen what Rick Tocchet has done, and they've kind of had some predictable success, right? I mean, we knew that the schedule at the end of the year was going to be soft, and that they were going to have a bit of a bump, right? A, from the new coach, B, from a soft schedule, and C, from Thatcher Demko coming back. So, people wonder if this can be sustained and allow them to vault into next year. Well, it didn't work last year, right? The bubble didn't work for the next year, right? So I do think that there's some positives in terms of how their structure is developed, right? And they're a little more committed to playing 200-foot games and being connected, between forward and D, whether they have the puck or not. Like there have been some encouraging signs, but for me, talk to me next November, right? Like if you're a fan coming and saying, well, is this going to carry? I don't know, right? I have no idea. I'm kind of 20% bought in because I do know that Tocchet's a detailed coach, but at the same time, I don't know that this roster is going to be set up for any level of sustainable success. We'll see if they could do this offseason what they couldn't last offseason, and that's clear money, right? I mean, I think we all expect Oliver Ekman-Larsson to get bought out, and maybe one of Besser or Garland gets traded, and they can clear some space that way, maybe. But they're going to spend it quick because they're in a hurry to get in the playoffs, right?
Yeah,
that's that's the message coming down from ownership. So I just don't think they're building anything sustainable. Would I enjoy just covering playoffs again? Sure, I would. It's been a minute, I was able to go cover it in the bubble, but most people never got that luxury, right? So I think the playoffs are fun. I love in Vancouver just the vibe down at Rogers Arena, and they have this area out here called Scott Road, which is right between Surrey and Delta, and they have Scott Road Sellies, and once you get into the end of the first round of the playoffs, after every game, there's mini parades and celebrations after every win, and all that stuff is cool, and you want to be a part of it and all of that. But I'd love to, having covered every game of that 2011 team and the build up to it, I want to see something that looks like that.
Yeah. It's tough. I feel like, John, when we've touched on it, and Farhan really brought it up right there. When he hit the nail on the head when he talked about when Jim Rutherford came in. I relate it so much to the 2008 Leafs when they bring in Brian Burke, guy with pedigree, guy with experience. All right, they're going to do it the right way. He's going to make the proper deals, sign the right guys. It never felt like he was going to strip down like to the nuts and bolts or anything like that. But you felt that this was the turning point right here. And it took a while for, obviously post Brian Burke and post Dave Nonis and so on, to just realize that you need to just strip it down and go for the full rebuild, right? If you have a team that's kind of middle of the pack like they are, it's just amazing to me that they won't accept that. But
Lucas, it's hockey hell. We've talked about it so many times. Like finishing in that 9 to 11 place in the conference is like the worst, and I feel like the Canucks are in that spot right now. And more so, I like what you said, Farhan, because it's like when you're in a job interview or a press conference or whatever, it's like people like, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Where do you see yourself 3 years from now or 1 year from now? And it's like, no, the Canucks just want like things to get better tomorrow, and that's just that's not it. No, and
a full rebuild doesn't mean you get rid of Pettersson, Demko, and Hughes, right?
Yeah,
it just kind of means everything else.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean you've got to go through 5 years of pain, but you can kind of make some moves and turn it around in a more sustainable way in 2 to 3 years if you're not so obsessed with getting into the playoffs next year. But that's what this ownership group wants, and that's what this management group's going to execute.
Well, and I'm sure Canucks fans are happy that Kuzmenko didn't get tossed away for a second, because I saw that around Twitter. I was like, hey, let's relax for a second. Outside of that, I mean, there's moves that probably should have been made. For your perspective in terms of, because like just when I said about 2-3 year timelines or whatever it is like Conor Bedard hasn't been a secret. And Farhan, we've talked about that a lot on this podcast. And obviously there's been so many like Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, like there's been big names the last decade, but like Conor Bedard here, a BC guy, like I feel like it hasn't been a secret. Like I've seen different interviews and different like media stuff, even from the Regina Pats, is like, this guy is a Canucks guy. Like he's a Canucks fan. Like he likes the Canucks. Like Lucas, I think we joked about it. It's like the Pats were doing a video at the start of the year, getting all the players to answer like, who's your cup pick? And all the guys are saying like Colorado, Tampa, like all these teams. And then Bedard says Vancouver, like Canucks, right? And I just like, so this hasn't been a secret. And the Canucks had an opportunity this year where it's like, before bringing in Tocchet, you had what, like a top 6, top 7 percentage, like solid. And if you made a couple deals, maybe rested Demko for the year and did just like simple things. There wasn't like this big change needed. You just let Boudreau, Boudreau, that was the worst secret in hockey, how the search was going. But Farhan, what are your thoughts on that? Like not even just like the quick fix, but like having something like Conor Bedard right in front of your face and still going against the grain of like, just shut down the season. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. At the end of the day, going for the number 1 pick, doesn't always work. Doesn't often work, right? I mean, in reality, because you're not guaranteed. It's not like you got a 90% chance of getting that pick.
Of course.
Right? It becomes hard the way the lottery is set up. So you go through all of that and then you don't get him. Now, for me, I think some of the things you talked about were prudent, but that's because this entire draft class is so incredible. Yeah. And there seems to be there's Bedard, then there's the top 5, and then there's kind of still good players after that, but there is a bit of a gap between 5 and 6. from everything I've read and heard. So just to give yourself a chance to get somebody in the top 5, it could mean a roster player next year, right? Like it doesn't mean that you need a 2 to 3 year marination period of that player in the minors, right? So I think you just, if you adopted that strategy, you put yourself in a position to get a really, really good player. And if you get Bedard, great, right? But if the Canucks had finished 27th versus or 28th, let's say, that would put you in the bottom 5 versus 24th, where they're probably going to wind up, it's not a massive percentage difference in terms of how it's going to go for the number 1 overall pick. But it is a big percentage difference for what it looks like in the top 5. And how, with Canuck luck, they're going to lose a spot, right? Yeah. So if you can finish 4th last, you could still get the 5th last pick or the 5th overall pick. And, you're more likely to go that way. And that's still a real positive thing. So, the Demko thing, it's tough because I think the fact that he's being able to regain his form this season is really going to help him next season, because for him, so much of it is mental, right? And once you've kind of made the decision that you weren't going to trade him, right, which if this is a retool, you shouldn't trade him. He's the one efficient contract they've got, right? Like, it is a really good deal for a team looking for a quick turnaround, right? For any team, it's a really good deal. So once you decide that you're not going to make that move, then you probably want to try to rebuild his value, or not his value. You want to rebuild his confidence a little bit. Now, did he need to come back this early, or could he come back for the last 10 games, right? It certainly doesn't look like they're pushing Philip Roenick real hard to get back in the lineup, right? So hopefully that takes a long time, and that helps, because we certainly believe he's got the ability to allow this team to possess the puck and transition the puck much better than they are when Quinn Hughes isn't on the ice. So, but ultimately they haven't, there's not been a lot of other moves they could have made. They're out of recalls now, right? Yeah. So, I said, hey, could you get Rathbone up here with a more structured look with the coaching staff, and maybe we can see if he's better than he was earlier in the year when they were playing, pond hockey essentially. And, could we see Nils Höglander, right? But, there's restrictions around him. Like, they can't recall him at this stage unless it's an emergency. And if they bring him up for 2 more games, then he's got to go through waivers to go back and forth again. So there are circumstances around it. But for the most part, they got 3 American League defenders on their blue line, right? They have got Kravtsov here, Podkolzin's here. I'd love to see them get more minutes, but I'm not going to quibble too much with how they've deployed their roster, just because I think their options have been somewhat limited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Farhan, let's also talk about just like some positives from the Canucks. I don't want to all be doom and gloom. Kuzmenko, like you said, Johnny, like, I can't believe I thought he was going to be super talented this year and he was going to really emerge, but I didn't see this. I didn't see close to 40 goal potential, like, first year. You got to give that some props. And obviously Elias Pettersson is having a crazy good, and I feel like underrated year. Like, people aren't talking about what he's doing from an offensive standpoint, at least.
Especially with everything that's happened with the Canucks.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So with those guys sort of being, 2 pieces that we're going to bring, the Canucks are going to bring back next season and sort of retool around them, Quinn Hughes, Thatcher Demko, how do you see those like 4 players as key guys to build around for Vancouver in the next phase of this team?
Yeah, Kuzmenko has exceeded everybody's expectations. He's been incredible. I don't know that he's still, because of his age, I'm not sure he's necessarily a long-term piece, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to have him for 2 years at a good number, and he's going to bet on himself. And it's been great watching him play. They need a natural goal scorer. He seems to have been the perfect fit. And Pettersson has been incredible. And I know that everybody wants to save receipts from last year when people were critical of him. And, I can't believe people wanted to trade this guy. And for me personally, I was very critical of Pettersson last year. And I never suggested they should trade him. I did wonder, like, I always felt, the guy's going to be a first-line player, but is he ever going to be a top 10 player in this league or a top 5 player in this league, which after his rookie year, I fully expected him to do. But, as they say, like, progression's not always linear. You're going to go through some ups and downs, and he went through a down last year. And so now people are just saying, how could anybody ever suggest this? Well, he deserved to be criticized. And for me, it wasn't that he wasn't scoring. It's just that he wasn't playing with the level of confidence that we had seen him play before. He wasn't attempting to be as creative and dynamic with the puck as he had been previously. So everybody wanted to just single it out and say it's his wrist. Well, it wasn't that, because if we were just talking about his shot, you could isolate it to that. His faults were greater. But the reason why Pettersson is playing this well is he didn't give himself a pass. He saved his own receipt from that perspective, right? Like he just said, no, this isn't good enough. Don't make excuses for me because I'm not making them for myself. And he showed some maturity, in terms of off ice and just what he was going to prioritize and all of that. And we're seeing the results of it now. And hopefully he signs long term, right? Because I know that as the season has progressed, there's been debate about what that was going to look like and whether or not he wanted to move on. And I'm not saying he does, but I fully hope that they give him the C and get him signed to a long-term extension this offseason, because one of Jim Benning's many mistakes was giving him a 3-year deal instead of finding a way to get him a 6-year deal or longer the last time, right? Because now it's going to cost the Canucks a lot more. But you know what? He's earned it, and he's not going anywhere, right? Barring injury, he's not going anywhere. His game is going to continue to climb and ascend. And, I love the way he sees the game and thinks the game, let alone plays the game. So, he's been great to watch. He's now back on that trajectory I saw from the first year, right? And even then, like, he would get annoyed at all of us for suggesting that he needed to get stronger, right? And maybe he wore down because he just wasn't strong enough. And he would dismiss that, with media. But when he went back home, you find out after the fact that those things were the single biggest focus of his training. He knew that was real and he needed to improve on those areas, and he's doing that. So it's good to watch.
Yeah, I feel like Pettersson on ice, like at different times, I feel like I've seen lists, but at times, like conversation of like, is he the top 5, top 6, top center like in the league? And I feel like last year it was like, I'm seeing these top 20 lists, like Pettersson's not on it. So I don't know. Pettersson's that interesting one for me where I feel like even just whether it was later in hockey or just kind of his development, I feel like he's always shown the tools and like at times like the IQ, like some of the creation he has on the ice is up there with the best in the league. We touched on Luke Schenn earlier, Farhan, and just you said great guy. Yeah, your guy. Some players maybe that you've interacted with, like Luke Schenn one, but maybe through the Canucks or through CFL. Like I also want to touch on with maybe your favorite day to work, but like who have been some of your favorite players to interact with?
Well, in terms of recent history, I wasn't lying when I said on Trade Center that if you're a good guy, the Canucks let you go, right? So it started with Bruce Boudreau, it went to Bo Horvat, and then Luke Schenn, and then Curtis Lazar, right? And Luke was like, for the time that we've had him in 2 stints, I love the guy, right? Like he's just a good human being. And, people say that, it's because he's good with the media that you like a guy. And I'm like, it's not that, right? It's, for me, I could give a damn about the Canucks, but I love Vancouver. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So when you have guys that represent the brand really well, are super in the community and with kids and do all of these types of things, I really appreciate those guys. They matter more to me than the player that might be elite if he's not going to do all those other things. And I think, growing up when Pat Quinn was in charge and instilled that was a real priority for this brand, and other people carried that forward, and really from the leadership group, whether it be the Trevor Lindens or the Marcus Naslins or the Sedins, those things matter to me. So, Luke's great. We used to have a lot of laughs. There was one time I came in like literally a minute late to a scrum, and somebody was holding our TSN mic flash before I got in, and rather than grab it from them, I just let them hold it, and I just proceeded to ask questions. And Luke looked at me, he's like, "What, are you too big to hold your own mic?" Right? And and we had a lot of fun off camera just interacting. So I hated seeing him go from that perspective, but he was also a productive player. And I know they're talking about bringing him back this summer. I don't think in the end that'll work itself out, just because of what some of these young blue liners have shown, and you want to create opportunities, which is good. But I like people that are, look, I'm 54, man. I don't want to deal with a young 20-year-old punk. Yeah, I hate saying that, right? So maybe I'm grizzled, but I don't want to deal with that, right? I don't want to deal with this guy that's got attitude, that's too cool for school. Dealing with the Sedins was a blessing, right? They were as awesome a pair of individuals, like in terms of people that I've covered in any sport in 25 years, really 28 going back to my days in radio to start. I have never come across 2 people as wonderful as the Sedins. Like they are fantastic human beings. They were great leaders, great players. It's great the organization still has them involved in a meaningful capacity. And that's the impression you want to strive to leave, right? I think their second last home game, my son got a chance to take part in the Dream Skate. That one kid that comes on the ice when the players do the lap before the anthem. So he got to do that. And I've got a picture of him between like Alex Edler and the Twins, kind of on either side of him.
That's so cool.
And it is. And I said to him, at the time that, no matter how things go for you in sports or life, like these are the two types of people, like these guys, that's who you want to be like, right? Just incredible people, incredible ambassadors. Wherever they go, they leave the place better than they arrived. And certainly they did that with this franchise, even though it didn't look like that when they left, right? Because things kind of fell off a cliff. But, they made an indelible imprint. And why is it so hard for a good player to be a good guy? Why is that hard? Why are those things mutually exclusive? Do you think that you lose your edge if all of a sudden you treat people, including the media, with a level of respect? Because nobody, I enjoy covering a better team than a bad team, right? Like the 2011 era to cover was fantastic. And right now, this might be the worst time I've ever had in my job in terms of enjoyable, coming to cover the hockey team. Like it sucks to cover that team, right? It's not a good group to be around. It's getting better as they're getting a little more successful, but it was toxic for a period of time to go into that room. It wasn't fun to be around it. The narratives from how Bruce got treated, everything in the beginning, it wasn't fun. And I work in a make-believe world, right? What I do, this isn't real. I'm not dealing with the Ukraine war. What I'm dealing with, this is make-believe. Mm-hmm. So, to come in and just have all that level of negativity, nobody wants that. You think I want to cover negativity? You think I want to be negative? Right? So it is okay to treat people well. And, when you talk about Luke Shen, he's right at the top of the list. And in terms of people that I've covered, it doesn't get better than Daniel and Henrik, right? And losing Bo hurt in that regard, losing, there's been so many good ones that when they leave, you feel it, right? But Luke Shen definitely a guy just enjoy talking to whether the camera's on or off.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of great things about the Sedins. Sorry, Lucas.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, hopefully he doesn't come back west. I hope he stays out east here with the Leafs and continues his career here. But we'll see how it goes. It feels like everyone the Leafs have acquired, the team is rumored to bring them back. So we'll see how it goes. But that's a good bright spot for Vancouver that they had him there, through this tumultuous time. I assume he was like really, really valuable to that locker room.
And it was telling from Quinn Hughes' reaction too.
Yeah. And him and Quinn Hughes' relationship and on and off the ice. I mean, that's awesome to hear those stories. Farhan, just going into next season, as far as expectations, I think it's going to be better for Vancouver that the expectations obviously are going to come down from what they were going into this year, right? I feel like it's safe to say that. I mean, we never know with these big markets, but I think it's safe to say that. So going into next season, what do you think is a successful season for Rick Tocchet's first full year and moving into, that new chapter for the Canucks?
Yeah, honestly, Lucas, I'm not convinced that they are going to be lower. And I say that just because the organization wants them to stay high. So they're talking about playoffs. So anything less than that's going to be failure, right? And you can't predict health, right? Demko gets hurt again. Hughes gets hurt again. Like, you can't predict that. But based on what this roster looks like on paper, the Canucks metrics, like their two-way metrics with Quinn Hughes on the ice, are that of a playoff team. If Philip Rona can bring even half of that onto a second pair, their defense should be significantly upgraded. Ilya Mikheyev potentially gets healthy. Who knows if they clear some space and they can add one more piece. The goal for this team is going to be to get into the playoffs, and that's what is going to deem it a success. And I'm having this debate with guys I podcast with on The Athletic, Thomas Drance and Harman Dial, and they just want to keep hammering home rebuild. I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore, because they've said they're not going to do that. So I don't want to grade every move they make in the prism of a rebuild, because that's not what they're trying to do. They want to retool. They expect to be in the playoffs that next year. So for me, I'm going to gauge the first 20 games based on, do they fall off a cliff like they have the last couple of years, or are they going to put themselves in position to stay in contention and not chase all year? We know this team's not going to win the cup, but next year, if they're healthy, they should have a playoff roster. And that's what is the goal that they've set. So anything short of that is going to be a failure, right? For Rick Tocchet and the entire organization. So, and that was the thought this year, right? I mean, Jim Rutherford said at the beginning of the year, if we don't get in the playoffs, we're going to be disappointed. Bruce Boudreau said, if we don't get in the playoffs, we're going to be disappointed. So that's going to continue to be the measuring stick. And until they get there, we can't set the bar any higher.
Yeah, I think And I think this goes for a lot of fan bases. Like, I think what you said, Farhan, about like fantasy, like I think the realism versus like the fantasy, I feel like it's more so just like a coping mechanism. Like, oh, the Canucks could do this, the Canucks will do that, the Canucks will do that. But yeah, I mean, it's right in front of us. They've made it very clear that this is a retool. This is an on the fly. And obviously through the press conference, I think Rutherford slipped up more than a couple times. So, which there was truth to it. But just to kind of close out, what are you excited about going? I know you were talking about life stuff, but just in terms of like the CFL season, what are you looking forward to cover? And I know I touched on it before. Like, what's your favorite day to cover just in sports in general?
It's a good question because for so many people, it lines up with, free agent frenzy for if you're a hockey fan or the trade deadline, and those aren't mine, right? I probably like favorite thing to cover, like in terms of a day.
Yeah, like it could be a day, it could be an event.
College football playoff.
Oh, there you go.
College football playoff, right? When the two national semifinals happen, I always look forward to those. New Year's Day when the big bowl games are on, right? I'm kind of a college football junkie, so I enjoy that. A wild card weekend for the playoffs in the NFL is fun. Labor Day for the CFL, right? When you've got the games that are going on that weekend, and they say that the true CFL start of the season is then. But, just coming up for me, I've got in a week, I'm going to go to Edmonton for the CFL Combine, which is different this year because they're going to do, a week's worth of football activity. It's not just testing. So that'll be fun. I'll go from there to the NFL draft in April. And then the CFL draft, I'll be in Toronto at the beginning of May. My son's got a 7-on-7 tournament in Vegas in the midst of all of that. So I'll get to that. And so there's a lot of different things. I don't know that I kind of have that one day. It used to be New Year. When I was a kid growing up, it was always New Year's Day because that's when all the big bowl games were. Yeah. But then as the playoff has come and the playoff has taken the two big games to New Year's Eve and it affects New Year's Day a little bit, it's probably less of a big day. But yeah, I mean, probably those different days over the calendar year where there's going to be a bunch of big football games that have lined up. Championship Saturday, even in college football, where all the conference championships happen kind of on that weekend. So those are good times. The first 2 days of the NCAA tournament, right? The last 2 days that we've seen, there hasn't been as many upsets, but there were still two big ones on Thursday and two big ones on Friday. So, and I don't have to cover those, so I can just kind of watch them as a fan. So that's fun too. But I would probably say any of the big football days that line up, I think are a lot of fun. I know a lot of NFL fans have been excited about that first day of NFL free agency on the Wednesday, but I'm probably more about when things are happening on the field.
Yeah, I like what you said there at the end is it's such a different perspective when you're enjoying something as a fan versus like working. And obviously it's a passion and it's something you love and we love, but just the perspective as a fan, like I know, like Lucas, I'm sure you feel the same, like, especially if you're in a work environment. Of course, it's still the sport. You still love it, but just obviously it's just a different perspective.
You also just have a different, you got a different lens on, right? When you're consuming the game. Like yesterday, I was watching a lot of the March Madness games, and they're just awesome because you're watching it for the pure chaos that they are, right? Yeah, and the excitement. So,
for me, the only thing I haven't let go of in my fandom is probably college football, and even though I have to cover the playoff. Like you can see right here, I'm a huge University of Washington fan. Since like my first college football game I watched was Warren Moon playing in the Rose Bowl. And so I've carried that through. So even though I do have to cover it a bit more now, because the Huskies have only been in the Final Four once. And that was probably my most, I've had two really conflicting moments where I haven't been able to separate fandom from coverage. Mm-hmm. Probably the Olympic gold medal game in 2010 and the 2016 Peach Bowl when Washington played Alabama, right? Like I was sitting there in the press box, like every time a great play happened, like pounding my without being able to cheer, like just kind of pounding the desk, good or bad, right? And people kind of looking at me funny. But so I haven't let that part go. So I still get to watch that as a bit of a fan as much as possible.
Oh, that's awesome, man. I've heard such funny stories on that. And like, even so when we had Duffy on, he was talking about when he was covering the World Cup and when Canada scored the goal, it was like all of them, like we're trying to like keep it cool.
I have video myself and Doug McLean, right? And Joey Kenward, who was a local play-by-play guy here. We were next to each other because for the Olympics in 2010, I covered all the sliding events like bobsled and luge and skeleton. I was part of that broadcast team. Yeah. So I was up in Whistler for the entire games, except they were done a day early, and I came back to help cover the gold medal game. So I was sitting in the stands, which was the auxiliary media box, and like the amount of tension in that building when the US scored late to get the game into overtime, like you could truly feel the tension. It felt like game 7 in overtime, Chicago-Vancouver, right? After Vancouver had blown the late lead. Like those are the only 2 games that kind of felt that way. And when the Canucks won, I felt a level of relief because I didn't want to have to go back and tell they choked stories again, right? So I wasn't cheering fandom. It was just a level of relief that, okay, we could continue on this playoff run and tell the story differently. But when Canada played the U.S. in that game and they scored the goal, like we were jumping up and down, literally hugging each other, right? Wow. Like I've got a picture or video or something like that Joey just showed me of the 3 of us, like literally embracing because, and I don't even know if it was cheering. It was just like, oh my God, thank God. Like it was just that kind of,
like a giant exhale.
Just because it was so, ready to, the entire country ready to fall apart in that minute if they had lost that game. And, Patrick Sharp with the shot against Luongo that Luongo comes across to make the save, on the power play in overtime. It like just all of it kind of built to that. So it was that. And then, like I said, the Peach Bowl for me were kind of my 2 moments, but like I have no problem. Like when the Canucks lost game 7, I felt bad for the Twins and some of the guys I really liked on that team, but I had no problem switching my mind into coverage, right? There was especially with the way that game went. And so it's not about being a homer or a cheerleader or whatever. Like, you develop a skill over that period of time where you can, switch from win or lose, switch storylines from good and bad. And it's easy. But so those are my 2 kind of conflicted moments.
That's awesome. It's I feel like that's kind of always been a trend and how I've talked to people is just that balance. And sometimes when you do it professionally, you've got to put that side away a little bit. And then of course you just get used to it. But Lucas, anything
unless
else?
It's the Leafs and the Jays, just for the record. Unless it's the Leafs and the Jays. Because I can't want them to lose more than I possibly do.
The
Who's
Jays
your team in MLB?
I want to hear more about that. The Jays. What's wrong with the Jays? Who's your team? I want to hear this.
The Mariners. I live in BC. I live in the team.
That's right.
2.5 hour drive. I can go down there and watch it. Why do I have to fill my head with the Jays? Because they're the only team in Canada. They're not my regional team. They're not my closest team. So I've never liked the Jays. I think when I grew up and I felt the need to pick a Canada's team, it was the Expos. Right, like in baseball. And then I had my regional team. And then when the Expos left, then I only had my regional team. And when people keep telling me that the Jays are Canada's team, I lose my mind. Like I have no time for that at all. And and with the Jays and the Leafs, like just the amount of oxygen they take up, like it affects what I do, right? Like our budgets truly would get affected if the Leafs made a run to the Stanley Cup final. Like there would be things I couldn't cover because of how much money gets spent on the Leafs. I remember one time we had a producer, like when the Leafs played, I guess it was the Islanders in the playoffs before they went on that epic, no years in the playoffs. And they actually thought that in Vancouver we cared. So Boston Pizza was having these Leaf watch parties. Like they were having playoff watch parties, but
in Vancouver
when the Leafs played, well, they were having playoff watch parties, but then when the Leafs played, our producers said to me, "Oh, go cover them. Like go to this Boston Pizza. We got a thing going on there." And when because it's the Leafs game, and certainly there was going to be a big party in Vancouver for the Leafs. I'm still waiting, right? So we went there, and there was literally like 2 people at the bar watching the game, right? But in Vancouver, or in Toronto, they had this vision that everybody in Vancouver was all into it, right? Like, and there are probably 8,000 to 10,000 passionate Leaf Toronto transplants that live here, and they're the ones that all go to the games. But after that, it's kind of not there. You probably have a bit more of it on the baseball side, but like if the Jays went on a run in baseball and got deep into the playoffs, that affects our CFL coverage, right? I don't want that. I want to be able to cover the CFL and have it matter. I don't want us to be providing all of our resources to being on the road with the Blue Jays. That's not my thing. So, and that's not the only reason, and I don't mind the Raptors, right? I'm kind of, I like the impact they've had on basketball in the country. Leafs and Jays.
Well, no, honestly, I like it keeps me in check sometimes, Farhan, because I feel like talking to people from Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, like it's I know the perspectives there. It's just for me, like, just being centered in it. It's everything.
Hey, from a business standpoint,
yeah,
I'd make the same decision.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't disagree with how they're covered from a business standpoint, but being affected by it and being at the other end of it, you're just like, get that away from me.
I know.
So, yeah. So who are the Leafs playing in the first round? Tampa, right?
Tampa. It'll be Tampa. Right. Yeah.
I'm going to give John.
We know who you're cheering for.
Get him pumped up. Oh yeah.
Well, Farhan, the one thing you can hold on to is your boy Luke Shen is wearing the Maple Leaf this year. So
there you go.
You can be happy for that guy.
He's got 2 cups. He doesn't need another one.
Well, hey, he's playing Tampa this time around, the team he won. So Farhan, we really appreciate it. We're glad we got that perspective at the end because I feel like Lucas, a lot of our guests, whether it's been from like Alberta or out in BC, like it's good to get that different perspective because I think just for both of us, we can get that Leaf centric going a bit. And I mean, that's just our fandom, but Farhan, we really do appreciate it. Outside of, we know you do the Vancast, the Athletic, a lot of TSN stuff, CFL coming up. Is there anything else you have coming up that the people might not know about?
Probably not. No, just, I just love being able to travel again post-COVID and getting to a lot of these events and seeing history as it's being made. It's a lot of fun. So, the Combine's coming up next and looking forward to the NFL draft and getting CFL season started. All of it's fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Farhan Lalji.
Enjoy the Leafs playoffs run.
The game 7.
Short as it's going to be.
Yeah. And in May, we'll be already reevaluating what's going to happen for trades.
There you go.
We'll see. But Farhan Lalji, what a legendary guest. Episode 29 of the Hot Take Hockey podcast. Farhan, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on to chat hockey and sports.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Thanks a lot, Farhan. Spectre also had the same sort of energy when it comes to the Toronto media. Time for the Toronto market.
I'm glad I kind of pushed back on that a little bit because I kept it in his mind. I was like, no, we got to talk about Toronto versus Vancouver.
Yeah.
And I saw your face. I think you loved it when Farhan just opened. It was like we didn't even ask him a question.
We didn't even ask.
So I love it. I friggin' love it because you could see the genuine nature from people. And honestly, Lucas, I've talked about it. I honestly don't blame people for having that perspective. I would put myself in those shoes and I would just be like, if we were Canucks fans or we were Flames fans or we were Oilers fans, we would be tired of it in a way. Some people are more outspoken about it, but we would be tired over it. And I truly think you look, so even, so we had Sid on, he's on Breakfast Television and Breakfast Television, obviously everyone in Canada knows about Breakfast Television. It's in Toronto. Everything is out of Toronto, right? So it's I can see the perspective where it does get frustrating. And obviously, let's be honest, it's a freaking, it's a rare day if the Leafs don't fall on the main hockey night in Canada Saturday night, right?
Yeah.
It's a storyline itself. Even to the point where Ron on the pod is saying, oh, well, Montreal, Ottawa coming up this Saturday, no Leafs for once. So we'll get to talk about something different. Even I feel even the guys in Toronto sometimes are okay, this is especially if you're not a Leafs guy, it's probably a lot.
I totally see how it could get, how it gets exhausting, just having to hear about them all the time. And, we have the goggles on. We certainly have just the goggles on where sometimes, like you said, it's good to hear from these people because you sort of get that check of, what it's like to be on the other side of the coin. And Spectre was like that, like we said, and Farhan was as well. But Farhan, what a beauty, man.
Oh, what a legend. And I feel like we haven't had this problem on the podcast where I feel like someone's putting on a front or anything. So I can't speak on it. But I feel like Farhan full out was you could tell he was just ready to share his opinions. And I think that's another guest that I can speak on that I would have been down to talk with that guy for hours. Shoot the shit, just get his thoughts. And so huge thank you to Farhan, guys. Make sure you go follow him. I believe his Twitter is Farhan Lalji TSN. So go hit him up on Twitter. Go share him some love, feedback. Give him a shout from Hot Take Hockey podcast, Lucas and John, and just what a guy. I mean, and I wasn't just saying that to pump his tires, by the way, guys. Farhan, he's been one of the names that Lucas, when we've asked around, we were get Farhan Lalji on.
Buddy, A-Rod's gonna be hyped when he watches this. Oh yeah, man, he's such a Farhan guy. But a lot of, like you said, a lot of our buddies that we play hockey, soccer with, buddies in general, they love some Farhan Lalji. So they're gonna be stoked when they hear the epi for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Was there anything else that maybe you took from? I definitely wanted to make sure. I mean, you got your Luke Shen jersey in the background. I wanted to make sure to get a little Luke Shen thoughts. Was there anything else you kind of pulled from the chat? I feel like just his genuine nature. I feel like he wasn't He's just giving us his thoughts.
I was really curious. Yeah. When he was talking about just like his career path, like right out of the gate, I was just really curious, like on how he, sort of found his way into sport. And so that was really cool for me when he was sort of, football. Like, it seems like he's just a sport junkie, right? As a kid.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way in some regards, where my earliest memories in life are just like not just earliest, but my most vivid ones are like the road hockey game outside, that when I was like 8 years old. Like, I remember getting all my buddies, like knocking on people's doors, and those sorts of memories like just don't leave your brain. So it's cool when like you hear Farhan talk about it too. Like, he was like organizing leagues. I mean, we were even talking about it this week about soccer. We run soccer every Sunday with a group of guys. Like, so I mean, we're still doing that. But that was cool. That was cool when he was touching on that stuff. What about you?
Yeah, no, I like, and also I don't know if this will change like long term, but I feel like right now when he was talking about like, oh, the Canucks lost Game 7 to the Bruins, and I was just like, all right, let's move on. And I feel like, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you fully, but